Hello, USENIX. My name is Flynn Wolf from the University of Maryland in Baltimore County, or UMBC, presenting a paper co-authored with my colleagues Adam Aviv from George Washington University and Ravi Kuber, also of the University of Maryland in Baltimore County. The paper is entitled Security Obstacles and Motivations for Small Businesses from a CISO's Perspective. So we were interested in looking at small businesses for reasons that are probably very familiar. They're often noted to be a large and also very vulnerable population in terms of being unprepared in terms of IT resources and knowledge about online threats, things like hacking and data breaches or ransomware. They're often found to have limited resources for recovery from adverse events, so the outcomes can be very dire. We also know that they're increasingly targeted by cybercrime. So the perspective of CISOs, or Chief Information Security Officers, as advisors to small businesses is pretty interesting because they're essentially translating an advanced mental model of those online threats to non-expert small business management. This also fits into ongoing research we've done on mental models of online threats amongst expert populations. We were interested in trying to answer a couple of questions. How do security expert CISOs translate their model of risk for non-expert small business management from the perspective of those CISOs with direct small business exposure? What factors are important to small business security in terms of like IT factors or knowledge, and how well are those factors understood? Security guidance was an important proxy in this relationship, either as evidence for CISOs to convince small businesses or stand in for the guidance of CISOs themselves. So what resources are available and how effective are they? And also what practices are important to trying to put small businesses onto a better footing in terms of their IT security. To approach this, we began with an exploratory semi-structured interview-based study using qualitative methods with a sample of 8 small business experienced CISOs. They were private, federal, and state and county level CISOs who had worked directly with small businesses. And they told us a number of things, some of which you would expect, but there was some sort of interesting context in the details. So first of all, they confirmed what you might expect, that small businesses were generally very vulnerable and unaware about their IT security risks. CISOs were somewhat divided, however, on who was responsible for this, whether it was the small businesses not doing enough themselves, or whether it was a consequence of IT being given to the small business sector that is often not configured adequately. In terms of that important sort of factor of guidance, the source mattered a lot. Government guidance was deemed to be thorough but sort of impractical, whereas commercial guidance could be more written in layman's terms, easy to use, but also often was aimed at selling a solution. And again, CISOs also offered us perspectives on what practices were important. They also felt that small businesses were often reactive after it was too late to security events. A contrary sort of opinion here was that in some cases, small businesses, because they start out operating at Starbucks and on airplanes, basically using public Wi-Fi and open source tools and things like that, that they might learn from the get-go to be more cautious, but often that's not the case. It was also found that small businesses might receive improvements sort of incidentally through IT upgrades. They might be motivated from without by regulation in their domain. And also, again, that there are limitations in what they can learn from security guidance depending on the source. And also contractual obligations were sometimes a motivating factor, but that effect could be limited. We sought to extend our understanding of those themes in a larger study. So we carried out structured interviews, which I'll talk a little more about how those questions were set up in a moment. We recruited a non-overlapping sample of 19 CISOs. I'll note that it was a challenging recruitment process. CISOs can be kind of guarded in general, and as you might expect, and also trying to filter for direct small business experience and avoiding regional sampling effects and things like that made this quite difficult. There were some demographic characteristics. Unfortunately, it trended largely male, favorably. However, it was a well-qualified sample in terms of their experience with network security. And they also, on average, had worked most recently with a company of about 44 employees, which meant that they had a good direct experience with resource constraint examples and things like that, which made for some interesting context. So again, we chose a number of themes from the first study, including the motivations that small businesses might identify with for making improvements, what resources they might use to learn about security factors, what they understood about those factors, how those sources of that guidance might make a difference on what they took away from it, and also just the factors that were influences on small businesses when it came to making improvements. We put those themes forward, first of all, as a prompt and asked study 2 CISOs to respond in terms of their sentiment and also to discuss it. We then carried out inductive thematic coding of that discussion. The paper presents both types of data. I'm going to focus for time here on the thematic conclusions. So first of all, in terms of those motivations for IT improvements, obviously CISOs in study 2 confirmed, as you might expect, that small businesses were suffering from a lack of resources and a lack of knowledge about what needed to be done to protect themselves better. And again, there was sort of a divided view on the responsibility for this. On the one hand, small businesses might be focused on short-term profitability, but also when they did make investments, often the software that the CISOs were preparing for small businesses was often found to be poorly configured out of the box. Small businesses also might be motivated or enabled by other things, including IT upgrades or hopefully contracting with vendors for cloud-based software as a service. Tax incentives were noted, although they were largely unfamiliar. It was noted particularly that small businesses might be influenced by news reports about hacking events and also by fear of in their local business community not being perceived as a victim. Again, that relationship to guidance was found to be very important, but it depended a lot on the source. Government guidance could be lengthy and hard to parse. One CISO noted that you might not know what the protocols you're reading actually mean until you're audited. Others described it in very colorful terms about it being brutality to read and so on. On the other hand, commercial guidance was noted that you often, again, had to parse a sales motive in what you were reading, which made for extra work and interpretation. In terms of formats for education and security practices, there were some interesting observations that were offered. Practices like checklists were found to be very important and commonplace, but also could be limited. Their brevity, on the one hand, made them easy to carry out, but it could also make the intent of the checklist hard to interpret. Team-based exercises, again, could bring to life concepts for both IT and management, but also if they were not grounded in reality, they could be kind of a costly and ineffective in terms of a learning process. So based on those thematic conclusions, we were able to derive some interesting suggestions about practices that can help small businesses. So first of all, we were talking just now about checklists. So again, the brevity could be counterproductive. So there were some suggestions about how to counteract that. So essentially providing more context, footnotes, if you will, in that kind of a guidance structure, providing examples and references so the intent behind actions is clear. It's also noted that small businesses often can't afford to do everything, so providing a basis for prioritization and checklist actions could be helpful. Similarly, small businesses often, they can't spend the money they don't have. So sort of timing of guidance given to small businesses was important in terms of short-term business processes, trying to get ahead of IT security issues by interjecting them into preparation for things like hiring and making upgrade purchases. Also in longer term processes, trying to interject security messaging to management after tax projections annually are complete and the company knows what they have to spend. In longer term investment cycles, by the second or third round, the company may have settled a little bit and know what, again, they have to spend on security improvements, and also after product delivery when the company may be looking to, again, make internal investments. It was also noted that small businesses may be acclimated to considering emergency planning for commonplace things like fires or natural disaster, and that IT improvements for things like data backups and recovery can be folded into that. It was also noted that small businesses are often overwhelmed at the start when they're looking for guidance. So labeling guidance that's being offered to them in terms of things like IT experience that's required to use the guidance, the IT resources, or the business domain that might be specific to the guidance can help them parse that search. And again, supporting prioritization of the items in the guidance could make it easier to interpret. Again, team-based exercises were viewed as an important learning practice, but there were some factors that could help them be more effective and worth the investment. So again, vertically integrating management and IT so they can witness each other's decision-making and learn from that. And also particularly grounding the scenarios in the team-based exercises very closely in the financial specifics of the business and the business domain that applies to that business were very important in making the practice worthwhile. So I'll stop there and thank you for your time. Questions are welcome. Thank you.